Welcome to the Wandering Wingshooter podcast. My name is Ryan Reddick. I'll be hosting the podcast. I've hunted upland birds in my home state of Oklahoma all my adult life, and over the last 15 years, wandered in pursuit of game birds to Arizona, Colorado, Texas, Kansas, Wyoming, Michigan, and now North Dakota after a couple of weeks ago. I've met dozens of wonderful people in the uplands, and my guest tonight is one of those people that I've met by virtue of my bird hunting. I hope to introduce you to as many of those people that I meet as possible through this podcast. Please join me as I wander the uplands learning about birds, dogs, and guns. Today I'm talking with Charlie Jordan of Atlanta, Georgia. Charlie is the founder and CEO of the Charles Jordan Group and author of 2 books, In the Echo of the Shot and In the Hunt for Words. He has traveled the world hunting upland birds and waterfowl, and I think is like the penultimate guest on this particular podcast, which is about traveling to hunt. The podcast is sponsored by Pike Gear. An upland hunter who hunts hard needs clothing that is light, makes hunting easier, not harder. An upland hunter is always on the move and always thinking about his next move. He needs clothing that can move with him, clothing that doesn't hold him back or weigh him down. Pike Gear is designed for upland hunters who are always on the go and always dreaming about their next hunting trip. Visit pikegear.com to find the best upland hunting clothing you'll ever wear. Follow Pike Gear on Facebook and Instagram. And Charlie, tell the people a little bit about yourself.
Well, first of all, Ryan, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast, and excited, looking forward to the exchange, So, where would we start? I guess some of the things I'm always curious about is where and how upland bird hunters got started. The way I got started might be a little bit different. It goes back to my father. My father was from a little Midwest farm town, still is from a little Midwest farm town in Harvard, Illinois. And I think in his early 20s, he actually left the U.S. to go to the Peace Corps and went to northern Peru to a place called Iquitos and actually met my mom. They got married and then dedicated his life to the United Nations. So we traveled quite a bit around the world with my father and my mother. But during those years, one of the first memories I have of wing shooting was in the country of Chile. We were stationed in Chile. And you know how sometimes when you're very, very young, you always remember an image, right? I don't know if you're 4 or 5 years old, but you always remember this one image. Mm-hmm. And in 1973, my family was hiding in a basement in the capital city of the country of Chile, Santiago. And we were hiding in a basement, and I remember my father saying, "Charlie, look." And I looked out the window. You know those windows that you can see half of the ground and then half of the upper side.
Like escape windows, so you could crawl out.
Exactly. I saw tanks going by, and I saw soldiers. And it was when Allende was being overthrown by Pinochet in Santiago. That is the first image I remember. And the second image I remember is that during those first years in Chile, my dad would take me once in a while hunting for tinamous and for doves in the fields of Chile, the endless fields of Chile. So for many years, I was his dog, retrieving partridges and retrieving doves. Actually, once in a while, I think I still am sometimes when we go hunting together. He says, I need you to go get that duck, But that is my first memories of how we got started. So eventually my father, with his position, he was moved around the world. But that sporting tradition that he brought from little Harvard, Illinois, where he grew up, as my grandmother would say, just bringing one pheasant in between each finger, that sporting tradition, he carried that tradition almost to every country that we lived in. And I think that was a major source of inspiration, not only for me, but I know that he has enjoyed it all these years as well, So that's kind of how I got started into hunting, by much like so many other people probably, right? Retrieving the quarry of our dad or of our moms or of our uncles or of our grandparents, whoever it might be,
Oh, yeah, and that's, in a lot of ways, that's exactly how we started. My dad didn't have bird dogs, or he did, but not often. It was generally the exception when he'd have a bird dog around. But we'd go quail hunting, walk them up and shoot them, and it was a big deal to kill a batch of quail.
Exactly.
And you know, Charles, when I go and travel to hunt to different places in the United States, I've not traveled internationally, but in the United States, one of the things that I pay attention to is what I call the hunting culture in those areas.
Right.
And I've spent quite a bit of time up in Michigan with some friends from Michigan, and they just have this wonderful hunting culture that goes back generations and is so appreciative of the rough grouse in particular, but hunting in general. And it's so much fun to compare those different areas. I was in North Dakota just last week, and that culture there, it's similar in so many ways to what we have here in Oklahoma and what I've seen in Michigan, but it's different too, and not in an unpleasant way. It was really neat, in particular the way their landowners treat their hunters is quite refreshing, actually,
right.
Up there. So I'm fascinated by the culture that surrounds the hunt in each of these individual areas, and I bet, you know, having hunted internationally, I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say that each of those countries that you and your father have hunted in probably have unique things about their hunting culture that you've picked up on as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And for example, as Americans here, we might think that there's this very large, for example, hunting culture in Argentina. From my standpoint, the shall we say, the dedication from the Argentinian people towards hunting is not large at all, right? Just not large at all. In Chile, people might be more fans of bird hunting than they would be in Argentina. But in a lot of these nations, right, it's unfortunate that bird hunting and upland hunting is truly, truly almost segmented to a high level of income population, a high income demographic, right? So you have these little pockets of people who we might think have a very large hunting culture, but the reality is not. And so much of that culture, I think some of the similarities would be that there's always the entire tradition of the cuisine involved, right?
Yeah.
So much of their traditional cuisine is involved in there. One of the best cultures I've seen is in the United States. I think hunting, even though we're such a young country, is so integrated into our DNA that there's only a few countries where I've seen that. I think Spain is one of them like that, that actually has that relationship to hunting that we might have in the States. I don't know from a business standpoint, I don't know of another economy that could hold a model like Bass Pro Shops or Cabela's, former Cabela's, or Orvis, or any of these large, wonderful houses. I just don't think in any country there's that much interest. But if I was to compare one, I think Spain has that deeply embedded. And I've seen that in Spain, you don't necessarily have to be of a high income demographic to actually enjoy the bird hunting. I think we're losing a lot of it in England, especially with so much threats going on in England towards the sporting traditions, right? I think Italy is becoming less and less of a country where what we used to see back in the 50s and 60s is no longer there. But if there was one factor that would tie so many of these countries, that they are diverse cultures, I think the culinary experience at the end of the day is where they have a tremendous amount of pride, especially Spain, right? Especially South Africa, if you will, or Kenya. You have some traditional recipes of those areas that are virtually unknown to the rest of the world. So it's always fun to discover them.
Well, and I follow a gentleman on Instagram that's a bird hunter in Argentina. And most of his posts, not most of them, but probably an equal percentage of his posts is the food after the hunt. You know, that's right. Obviously very important to him.
Right. And one of the things that I think is incredibly important, something that I have valued quite a bit, is I think that in the U.S., we are too quick to just breast our birds, right? And I totally understand about breasting. Nobody's got time to actually breast. It's a pain in the rear end. I absolutely understand that. But the reality is that some of the most extraordinary flavors of every game bird are far beyond just the breast of the bird, right? And that is why for so many years now, I have plucked almost every bird that I've hunted, just because I think the most delicious flavors are in the tiniest wings or in the smallest little thighs. For example, with dove season, we always pluck all of our doves, and you go inside, and I know this takes time, so I'm not saying that everybody should do it, but for me, just taking out the livers, the hearts, and the gizzards, and sauteing those, and actually using as much of the game bird, whether it's waterfowl or upland, I think that's an area where it's so much fun to explore how much taste you can get out of there. When we go to Canada with my dad and they're saying, oh, the snow geese don't eat well, they're not really good eating, I don't know why that rumor has started, other than I think that a few people may have not cooked it the right way, or they just went on a different tangent. But some of the greatest eating game we've had are those huge jackrabbits from Kansas, snow geese, where we can actually confit snow goose legs, you know.
So I'm going to back you up. You've eaten a jackrabbit.
I'm sorry?
You've eaten a jackrabbit.
I think it is probably the most exquisite game and the most underrated game that there is. If you ask my father, he says there's no question about it. Jackrabbit, European hare, right, is probably his favorite game, and I'm almost right there with him agreeing. But when I'm going to Kansas, I'm the one shooting the jackrabbits and, of course, skinning the entire thing, taking their livers, taking their hearts, and there's so many wonderful recipes that one can learn how to do that. I do realize, though, that it takes time to do all these things, and I know all of us are working 9 days a week, right? But if there's one thing that I would love to see more of is all of us investigating that there's so much more than just the breast or the loins, if you will, of a jackrabbit.
Well, and a jackrabbit's a pretty big animal. A lot of people don't realize how big an animal they actually are.
Yeah.
I tell you what, Charlie, that's fascinating to me. For my whole life, I mean, jackrabbits, I see them almost every time I'm out quail hunting, and I've shot them, of course, especially as a boy, when you kill everything that moves. But as I've gotten older, I couldn't tell you the last time I killed a jackrabbit, but I may want to try that and try out a recipe and serve some of my friends some jackrabbit just so I can see what it's like.
It's just so the one bird I had, I remember this clearly because I went to school in Washington, D.C., and I would sometimes play hooky in college and go over to the eastern shore of Maryland and shoot waterfowl. Mergansers were a little tastier than other ones, right? But like they do in Bolivia, you can actually take your duck and bury it underneath mud for a couple of days if it gets too gamey, if you will. But I just can't see any game bird not being fully consumed in every way, right? And I think that the culinary side of other countries, because we're such a young country, that culinary side, hopefully we start adapting and learning more how to maximize our game, you know?
Well, I think that's a matter of respect in a lot of ways, too.
Sure, it's like that old Indian story that said, how did the chipmunk get its 5 stripes on its back? And it turns out that all the animals in the forest got together and said, you know what? We realize man has to hunt us to eat. We're perfectly fine with that. But you know what we're going to do? If man hunts us disrespectfully, if he actually is drinking beer and shooting over the limit and doing all these things that are not meritorious of a conservationist and a sportsman, if he's doing any of these things, we're going to auto-poison ourselves. And then when he eats us, he will die. So all the animals agreed to this except for the chipmunk. And the chipmunk says, look, guys, I'm not into this because man never hunts me, so I'm not going to be a part of this deal. And the animals got upset and they clawed at his back. So those 5 stripes on the back of the chipmunks, so says an old Indian story, says that it was the animal saying he did not want to be a part of this. So whether it's true or not, I truly love that story because I think every animal should be respected before, during, and after it is shot, you know?
Well, and my grandmother, and she's passed now, but she grew up, she would have been a teenager and a young woman in the 30s here in Oklahoma during that particularly difficult financial time. And when I was a boy growing up, we'd go out and hunt quail, and I would always, every year, at least once and sometimes more than once, I would take my quail to her. I would go, and she didn't want me to clean them. She wanted to do it herself. And her eyes would light up like you wouldn't believe, Charlie, when I'd come in with 6 or 8 bobwhite quail. Because when she was a little girl, I mean, they didn't have a lot of food. And if her dad, he would put out live traps, and if he caught a covey of quail, it was like manna from heaven.
I love it.
Even in her 80s, those bobwhite quail were like manna from heaven to her. It was just like cake to us, you know. And every once in a while, I'd take her some clean birds, and she'd get after me because I wouldn't keep the hearts and the gizzards. And she'd keep those little old gizzards off those bobwhite quail, and she'd dig those little old thumbnail-sized hearts out of there and would fry those at the same time she'd fry the breasts and the legs. And those were her favorite part, you know. And I didn't get that from her, but I saw her do that.
No, and one of the things, as you and I have spoken before, I just started this small brand, right, called Missing Sucks, and we can talk about that later. But in Missing Sucks, in the website, we have this area called Cuisine, right? That step by step, it shows you how to actually just maximize your entire game. And I think that we've received so many warm compliments from so many people about the Cuisine page and other pages. But I'm a big fan of your grandmother's. I absolutely can see her point. I think the last post we did was sauteing the dove livers, the hearts, and the gizzards just for 30 seconds in a little bit of oil and into a spoon and with a little bit of wine. And it's just a whole new level of flavor, right? Just a whole new level of flavor that is so rich.
Well, and I can tell you, you know, I've heard more than just you. I've heard other men whose taste I appreciate talk about the benefits of plucking their birds, plucking their kill. And I frankly have always intended to try that.
Right.
But there's the time factor. And then I think what the bigger thing for me is that nobody's ever sat me down and showed me how to pluck a bobwhite quail to prepare it for the table. So until somebody can demonstrate to me how to do that efficiently and effectively, I'm hesitant to do it. Do you have any suggestions for how a guy would start doing that? Just start pulling feathers?
Well, I think it's one of the biggest, and once again, I'm not claiming to be an expert in any way whatsoever, but a tip that has worked incredible for me and for some of the people that I've suggested it to. If you're dove hunting or if you're quail hunting, come home, right? Don't gut the bird, don't pluck the bird, and just put them into a Ziploc and put them in the refrigerator for a day or two, no more than 2 days. And when you pull it out and you start plucking, the average time you spent plucking all the way to the wings, the average time that we've been timing ourselves over the years is roughly between 45 seconds and a minute 15. Something happens to the skin and the feather that it just comes off like powder. And I think that's one of the tips that we have in missingsucks.com. But it is such a wonderful time saver. At the same time, when I'm coming home from the field, before I start plucking birds, I'd rather pour myself a glass of wine and be with the dog. So it actually serves as a dual benefit, right? To put those away, let me get to them in a day or two when I've got more time, and I can rest from the field. So putting your birds in the refrigerator, exactly how you shot them, right? has been a wonderful friend, if you will, for me to be able to pluck everything. Which, by that same token, it reminds me, one of the things I don't see a lot of people doing here, and I try to do as often as possible, is to hang your birds. So I've been married for almost 22 years, and I've met my wife in Washington, D.C. in Georgetown. And a week after we started dating, she lived in an apartment in Georgetown, had a row house in Georgetown, and had a little tiny backyard, but there was a tree there. I was coming back from the Eastern Shore, and I had managed to shoot one snow goose. So I got the snow goose, and I just met this girl. I said, "Look, do you mind if I do something? Can I hang my snow goose from the back of your tree in Washington, D.C.?" And she said, "Oh my goodness, okay, that's fine." And I left the goose hanging, ungutted and unplucked. I think it was 9 or 10 days. There's two factors that you need to just make sure. You just have to make sure that the temperature never gets above 55 degrees, and you got to make sure that the bird has not been too badly shot up. But after those, I think it was 9 or 10 days, I'm going to ask her tonight, when I hung that goose and you start plucking it after that and gutting it after that, once again, another tiny little element that gives you a whole new level of flavor in any game bird, whether it's pheasants, whether it's sharptails, whether it's huns. Hanging birds is something I wish more people would try, because especially jackrabbits and rabbits, it really adds to the flavor, right?
It adds a richness, huh?
Tremendous. Tremendous.
Well, I'm going to have to give some of that a try. Hanging birds has always scared me a little bit. I've read about it, but it sounds like it'd be worth the effort. And I imagine in January, when it's colder around here,
absolutely,
I can maybe hang a pheasant and make that work. So you said in our earlier discussions you wanted to talk about sporting art. I mean, I love photography in particular. I was looking on your blog at some of the beautiful photography and videos you have on Missing Sucks. What is it that you like about sporting art?
I think that sporting art, whether it's hand-carved decoys, whether it's an oil on canvas, whether it's watercolors like Ogden and Pleisner that I just look at, I think when you look at art, it takes you to a place that you would like to be when you can't be at that place at that time, right? Yeah. And so if I'm sitting in a meeting, or as I've mentioned to you before, I live my life on a plane, traveling internationally and across the U.S. with clients, that sporting art, wherever I am, just takes me to that place, right? And so it's almost like comfort food when I can see that sporting art. And by the same token, I see that so much of the sporting art is underappreciated by so many people, right? And I wish that we could have a large amount of drive to actually revive and support our artists in the U.S. and internationally. For example, with I know some fans of your blog from Kansas and from California. We started this idea that Craig Kolchak was a wonderful author, but he sent me 12 hand-carved dove decoys, right? And he sent these dove decoys to me, and I was so grateful for that gift. I hunted with them. Hunting with wooden decoys just kind of gives another level to the hunt, in my opinion. And so with these two friends who I've never met before, only through Instagram, right? I said, guys, let me hunt with these in Georgia, and then I'm going to send them to Kansas, and then our friend there is going to hunt with them in Kansas, and then we're going to send them to California, to the West Coast, and our friend there is going to hunt them, and then we're going to send them back to Georgia. So what we were trying to do was to bring awareness to the lost, what I think is a disappearing art of carving, working decoys, and just bring awareness to that so people know that there are still wonderful carvers out there that are making their life out of doing a tool that we all love and that enriches our passion, right?
Absolutely.
So it's just goes to show you that in pockets of our country, there are still those elements that I think we have to feed and reinforce and support so we won't lose our sporting traditions. Sporting art, for me, is one of those elements that I think we should all, as upland hunters, as outdoor enthusiasts, should be supporting in any way we can.
And it almost goes hand in hand with the maturation of a hunter. As you get older, the actual kill itself has become to me, and I won't speak for you, less important. But the dogs have become primary for me, followed secondarily by the imagery, just the general beauty and the dance, that combination between the hunters and the dogs and the birds. And good artists capture that and frame that in a way that you can enjoy it year round, even when you're not there. I interviewed a guy, and his podcast I think is going to go up Sunday. I interviewed a guy, Jay Dow from Michigan, that draws rough grouse, and he takes this raw wood and he planes it flat, and then using the grain of the wood, he shapes his I guess it would be pen and ink drawing of a rough grouse, and he does other grouse hunting imagery as well, but really his signature is that grouse on that hardwood, and it's just fabulous. I mean, it's such a gift he has, and it captures for me the essence of what those men are loving about, what they love the most about hunting grouse up there in Michigan.
And I also enjoy very much seeing an experienced hunter look at a piece of art and actually just imagine what that person may be thinking after such a long sporting career, right? Like, for example, years ago, I was in London, and I went into the Holland & Holland store, and there was this extraordinary hare made out of bronze, right? And I was just looking at it because it reminded me of what I had seen as a child walking the fields of Chile. And I could only imagine how my dad, who believes the hare to be one of his most prized quarries, right, and one of his most succulent dishes that he could name, I would just imagine how he might look at this bronze statue of this hare, with a glass of wine in hand, just look at that art that was done by probably a sportsman who also enjoys the outdoors, and just see him reminisce on his storybook shooting life that he's had all these years. To be in the fields for 60 plus years and still be chasing birds, is something I hope to get. And he is in fine shape and walking more than ever. We just planned our trip down to South America to go after the red-winged tinamou and more hares and other smaller tinamous like the spotted tinamou. But I love to see how people who have had a long shooting career react to a wonderful piece of artwork on a wall and what it may make them think.
Well, and I can tell you in my chambers at the courthouse, in my chambers where I spend the majority of my time, I've got a Ross Young print on one wall, and I've got a Robert Abbott print on the other. And I cannot tell you how many times I catch myself looking in particular at those pointers that Robert Abbott drew, painted, and that covey of quail flushing in front of those hunters and thinking, oh my God, I can't wait for November to get here. Right. And those are there for me. They're not there for anybody else. And obviously other people I'm sure enjoy them as well, but they're there for me because they capture for me the thing in life that, other than my family, perhaps I love the most.
Sure.
And so, and again with the hares, that's fascinating to me because, when I was a teenager, we would chase cottontail rabbits with a bow and arrow. That was really kind of one of my first hunting crushes, for lack of a better term, it was so much fun to go chase those cottontails around these old abandoned homesteads out here. and try to shoot them with a bow and arrow. And I never was very good at it. They're not a very big target. But,
Right.
you know, to me, the rabbits or the hares are not a game species that I've pursued with any degree of dedication since I was a boy. And there's no reason for that. I mean, they're not any better or worse of a game animal than any other that are available to me. Our culture does not necessarily encourage that or hasn't out here.
Right.
Do you think your dad got that by virtue of his exposure to other hunting cultures?
Well, I think it started, and I might have to ask him, but I think it started in Chile in those years, right? But when I was working, I worked for Orvis, and I was their hunting clothing designer for many years. So I chased a lot of woodcock and grouse in those hills in Vermont. I remember every time a snowshoe hare jumped up, my goodness, I would not miss, but I was right on it. And I always thought that was a bonus. I love woodcock. I'm just obsessed with woodcock and grouse. I think you have to be it's just, I don't know how to even begin to describe rough grouse and what they mean to me, you know. But I always saw the snowshoe hare as a bonus and as a great cherry on top of the sundae because I loved it so much. But I think my dad's passion with hares probably began in those early years, mid 70s and late 70s in Chile when he was stationed there with the United Nations. You know?
I'm going to have to give some of that a try this fall. That really fascinates me, and I know that some of my local guys that I hunt with are going to look at me pretty funny when I shoot a jackrabbit when it gets up. But I'm going to give it a go. And that brings me to the next item on your list that you sent me that you wanted to talk about. And and you're not the only guy I've heard this from recently, but you wanted to talk about snipe hunting. And I've never shot a snipe. I've seen them. I know what they are. Obviously, we don't have a lot of open water around here, so probably not really good snipe hunting immediately available to me. But the more I hear from guys that are snipe hunters, the more I like the idea of going out and chasing that bird. Tell me about it.
So I think I shot my first snipe in the early 90s. I was in the Andes in Ecuador. And we were, I think, at about 12,500 feet, right? So the snipe we know here in the States is gallinago. We know it as the common snipe, the Wilsons, right? There are no jack snipe in the United States, only in Europe, right? But I think the first snipe I shot was back in the early 90s, along with the Andean partridges. So my dad and I and some friends, we would chase these snipe. I've always been guilty, and I've been contradicting myself for about 30 years because I always, at one point or another, claim a certain game bird to be the greatest game bird ever. Right? I seem to be saying that about every single game bird, but I'm going to go ahead and contradict myself again. I think the snipe is just the greatest game bird ever, and it's so wonderful as a bird. I think the reason it's not popular, if you read so much of the books that write about snipe, you know, back in the 1920s when market gunning and wildfowl gunning and waterfowl gunning came to a halt thanks to the treaty, the Migratory Bird Act of 1918, and which I'm very, very thankful for. Thanks to that treaty, it completely eradicated this blasting of shorebirds, whether they were yellowlegs or golden plovers or curlews or snipe or any of these, shall we call them long-beaked birds, right, that were there. By the time it came around, it had almost skipped a generation. So the new generation that was coming on board just did not have the exposure that it had before. I don't know why it hasn't caught on because it's an incredible challenging shot, right?
Oh, yeah, they fly like a woodcock, but faster.
Right, exactly. And I have a passion for them. I live here in Atlanta, and when the snipe come in, they'll go into Central Florida. And so I'll drive down real quick for about 7.5 hours and hunt all day, spend the night, and get back up here to work. And so it's a bird that, just like woodcock, it can be there on Thursday morning, and then it feels like Thursday afternoon, they're gone, right? Last year, somehow I timed it just perfectly, and we had a limit, I think, in about 4.5 hours of walking those deep swamps in Florida. The only caution there is the alligators. We've had close calls with the alligators as we're looking for snipe. But for some reason, the history of snipe, the art of snipe, right, the sporting art we see in snipe, the cooking of the snipe, the way I cook snipe, and you can see it on Missing Sucks, is I do not gut the bird. I just take its beak, skew its legs and thighs, pluck it entirely, put it in the oven, and chew on it. There is no gutting whatsoever of the snipe, because the entrails, just once again, add a whole new level of flavor. And just like the woodcock, the snipe, when it flushes, it defecates, right? So its intestines won't be filled with what and things like that, which I don't think I would mind, because I'm just so happy to have a brace of snipe in front of me with a nice bottle of wine that it could be full of what, and I would still eat it, right? And so I think whether we're chasing them in Florida or chasing them in Uruguay, there's this area in Uruguay where you can find the large snipe, or chasing them in the Andean mountain range, the snipe like the large noble snipe or the blue-legged snipe that you find in the Andean mountain chains. It's just such a wonderful, wonderful game bird, and I don't know if we've talked about this, but I've had a passion for the 410. So now for 11 years, all my hunting is done with a 410. So every time I hit a snipe with a 410, I think it has nothing to do with skills. I think it has everything to do with luck. But it is such a beautiful game bird to shoot. And it's a bittersweet feeling, right? Because that bird just migrated, much like the ducks. It migrated over 3,000, 4,000 miles. It started like I think it's 6 or 7 ounce bird, and by the time it arrives to its wintering grounds, it might just be barely over 4 ounces, right? So there's that bittersweet feeling that I've always had about such a courageous and wonderful and beautiful game bird. The demise of it coming in the echo of my shot, right? So that's another reason why we try to maximize the entire bird when we eat the whole thing. But just such a wonderful game bird in every way: the habitat, the shooting, the culinary side of it.
Will they hold for a pointing dog?
So that's the big thing. I have not hunted with snipe dogs that actually hold. In the Andes, they will hold for that snipe. But the marsh snipe, the one we find in Ireland and things like that, I have not hunted with dogs that can actually hold. The answer to your question is yes, and I think it depends on the dog. There's this gentleman, his name is Carlo Rizzini, in Italy right now, that we're friends via the internet and all these things. He's actually FaceTimed me while he's had both of his setters on the ground in the Irish bogs chasing snipe. And I think he has some of the most extraordinary snipe dogs that I've ever seen. And I've told him that. I just don't think that that's a common thing to have a really good snipe dog. It's different, though. When you go to the Andes for snipe, they will hold like a partridge or Huns or things like that. I don't know why. But the gallinago, the common snipe, gallinago, for it to hold, I think it depends so much on the wind, right? How windy it is that day. But the dog, I think the dog has to be a godsend, because it's incredibly difficult for them to hold that way. But I know certain people that have the best dogs that can do that, right? We usually just walk them up. We'll walk the marshes and the high grasses, and that's when we sometimes may kick up an alligator or two, which is kind of scary. But I think a snipe dog is the king of all bird dogs, in my opinion. My goodness, it's got to be,
Well, Edgar Castillo at first talked about hunting snipe with me, and he's given me an invitation to meet him up in central Kansas and chase snipe. I am so going to take advantage of that. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Can you call him right now and ask him to invite me too?
Okay. Edgar's a good guy. He's such a good guy.
Pick me up at the airport, wherever it is, you know.
No, he'd probably fly into Wichita. We could meet in Wichita and go from there. Be my guest.
Be considerate and give me 5 minutes advance notice. That's all.
Okay. So when I look at the Oklahoma regulations, there is designated as a game bird a gallinule, and I'm not even sure I'm saying that, and rail. Yep. And I'm not sure I would be able to identify on the wing either of those birds. Are they like a snipe, or are they completely different?
No, it's a completely different bird, even though the king rails or the clapper rails that we hunt here off of the shore in Savannah, Georgia, they have long beaks as well, but it's two very different birds. Once again, shooting clapper rails is another, I believe, disappearing art. It's almost 200 years old, and not a lot of people are walking those high tide marshes to actually flush these clapper rails. And once again, we had a guide that took us the other day, and we cooked some for him, and he said, I've been chasing these for years. I've never eaten a clapper rail the way we just cooked them right here. And it's not no specialty way to cook them. It's just the drive to actually say, let's maximize and eat this bird in a certain way. But no, they are two completely different birds, and a wonderful shot and great tasting on the clapper rail. A lot of people might disagree, and I think it's because they just haven't taken the time to truly explore the potential.
And they would be water birds, would they not?
Yes, they. The way we hunt them is the high tide comes into the grass, right? And so those marsh birds are in the grass looking for crustaceans. When the high tide comes up, there's not a lot of grass for them to hide. So that's when you would hunt them, you know, go on a little skiff, and then they just take off. I think we have a wonderful video on missingsucks.com on a recent clapper rail hunt.
And pictures also of the actual hunt.
Exactly. But once again, great tasting bird, a lot of tradition in that bird, and not a lot of people do it, you know. Not a lot of people do it. I believe, though, with your trip that you did, Ryan, to North Dakota, I told you how I felt some of those pictures. I just love that habitat in North Dakota out west where you guys are living. Love to be able to do some of those game birds that you guys are doing more often. You know, I just don't seem, because I'm living here, don't seem to do it as often enough as I would like, you know.
Man, it looked like a waterfowl heaven to me. Those potholes up there, every one of them held ducks and geese and crane. And that's in addition to the sharp-tailed grouse up on top of the hills and the huns down along the farm, the boundaries of the farm property. I mean, just something to shoot every time you turn around is what it amounted to.
Wonderful, wonderful. Which, by the way, I hear, I've never shot one or eaten one, but I've heard sandhill cranes are delicious. Have you heard this too?
Oh, absolutely. They call them the sirloin of the sky is what they call them out here.
The sky?
The sirloin of the sky is what they call them.
Oh my goodness!
And I think they're really lightly flavored. You know, and of course they're big birds, so. And that would be the breast meat that they're talking about. I've always just heard people breasting them out and grilling them, that they're really, really good.
And it's a big bird. I might have to go to 3-inch 410 show for that one. No, I'm just joking.
Well, I mean, you get close enough to them, the 410 will do the job. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
And the way they hunt them here, and I've not done it personally, but I've seen men do it, is they put out decoys in wheat fields, and they decoy the flocks in.
Wow.
Which would be fun shooting. I mean, if you obviously hunted ducks over decoys, once them birds set up and start dropping in, can you imagine a bird that's 3.5, 4 foot tall and probably weighs close to 20 pounds? Great. Wow. Big old, probably 5 foot wingspan, 4 foot, 5 foot wingspan, just dropping in out of the sky right on top of you. That'd be pretty fun shooting.
Wow. I'd love that.
And we saw them in North Dakota. The sandhills were there. They probably haven't gotten here yet. I haven't heard any, but about November, middle of November probably. When I go quail hunting, I almost always see flocks of sandhill crane going south, and you hear them. They have a beautiful call. Neat animal.
Excellent, excellent. So I'd love to do that someday.
And I've done just enough waterfowl hunting to know that I could really get addicted to it. But here where I live and where I've grown up, open water's pretty rare, so opportunities were limited. So it really never has set its hook in me like the upland birds have. But I'm sure not anti-waterfowl hunting, that's for sure.
Sure.
In your email, you talked about the golden age, and we talked about that a little bit before we started the podcast. Why don't you explain to me again what that means to you?
Well, between the mid-1850s, right, and the right at 1918, 1919, 1920, we slaughtered more wildfowl and waterfowl than I think we will ever slaughter in our history, right? More than ever before. And it was when there were no limits, no regulations, no care, any sort of conservation-driven initiatives, right? As the U.S., especially in the Northeast, the restaurants of Washington, D.C., of Boston, of New York were just claiming for more wildfowl. These market gunners, right, who were making a living, would just shoot with their punt guns and 2 gauges and 4 gauges, and punt guns shoot just enormous number of birds. I think the record was a couple of guys did 640 ducks one evening, because they would also spotlight in the Chesapeake Bay and the Delmarva Peninsula. And so when you look at a lot of the sporting literature, they talk about this being the golden age of waterfowling. And I think that those are some shameful years in our country's history. I hope that we can learn from that and never go back to that again. Because as crazy as it may seem, I see that in Argentina today, right? I see it. And I've been with the people shooting 250, 300 ducks just because they can, and just collecting maybe 30 or 40 and letting the rest just drift by. That makes me physically ill, physically ill to see that. Uruguay just canceled. Uruguay, where so many people were going duck hunting, they just closed their duck hunting season because there was so much indiscriminate shooting. And once again, the outfitter in these places saying, well, hold on a second. I can't tell an American coming down that he can only shoot 25 ducks. I won't get any clients. So I think we are to blame because we've done this before. And I think that the outfitter is to blame. But what I've read about in those years between 1845 and 1919, 1920, I see that happening in 2 other countries. And I've seen it happen in other countries where there's just no limits whatsoever, no regulations, no control. That is a big stain on all of us who don't stand up against it and say, that's wrong. We have people here in the States shooting way over the limit on doves, right? Shooting snow geese over their limit, or Canadas, or whatever it might be. So I applaud those conservation forces, whether it's the state troopers or the local police, who are arresting these people, because we can never go back there again. So when people call that era of our country the golden age of waterfowling, I see it as this shameful age of waterfowling. Now, some of the most beautifully hand-carved decoys came out of that era, and I do collect those decoys. But when I look at these decoys and I wonder how they floated right in the 1910s, they floated in rigs of 250, 300 wooden car decoys to attract these huge flocks so they could let the trigger go on the punt guns. When I look at these decoys, I also tell myself we will never go back to that age. And I'm not such an optimist to say, oh, that will never happen again, because I've seen too many things happen in the past that we forget about them, and it continues today. Just like I shared with you, Uruguay just closed down its duck season. I wouldn't even thought that could have been possible, and they just closed it down, right?
Well, and I would love to believe that overconsumption is the exception and not the rule. But knowing what I know about human nature, we get pretty bloodthirsty, and despite ourselves sometimes even.
Yep. Yep. And I think that a lot of that comes with age. I mean, you and I probably went through our 20s thinking, my gosh, if it flies, it dies, and things like that. And I think as we mature as sportsmen, we actually become more conscientious, but it's acting on that conscientious feelings that we have to make sure that the next generation have the kind of discipline that, in my opinion, the U.S. is the best country I've seen with regulations. Chile is another country that has had incredibly well-respected and stringent regulations because there's a will to do it, right? Places like Argentina, forget about it. Argentina is just a complete disaster in terms of regulations, and it's shameful. It's shameful. And so when we started going there so many years ago with my dad always said, you know what, let's just shoot 25 ducks. And 25 ducks was more than enough for me, I'm not passing judgment on telling somebody you should shoot only 25 ducks. But I would love to drive the thought of let your conscience do a little bit of the talking, because we've gone down this road before. And thanks to the government, right? And I know a lot of people have issues with the government, and government is good here, not too good here. I understand all that. But it's thanks to the U.S. government that Migratory Bird Act of 1918 was redacted, was signed, and was implemented. It is thanks to them that I can chase snipe today, that I can chase ducks, that I can chase so much of the wildfowl that almost became extinct. We lost 2 species during that time. It was the Labrador duck and it was the passenger pigeon. There's stories about James Audubon talking about wagons of passenger pigeons in Kentucky being loaded and carried out because the waves and the clouds of passenger pigeons were so vast and people were lined up. They would take all this game and they would put it on the trains and up to New York, up to Boston, up to Washington, D.C., and ice to the restaurants, So fascinating time in our lives, but I think pretty shameful, with what we did. We just hope it never happens.
I agree. And I mean, it feels like to me that we're in many ways fighting a rearguard action with the lesser prairie chicken, the sage grouse, and in some ways the bobwhite quail. And I'm glad that we have this mechanism, this group between the federal government and the state game agencies that are paying attention to what's going on with those birds, so that we can continue to enjoy opportunities to chase those animals going into this century. But boy, if the government wasn't paying attention, a lot of those birds would be gone, in my opinion.
I applaud the game wardens of our country and the game wardens of other countries. I just applaud them. I think they're very noble drive is what they're doing,
And you've talked a lot about South America. And I did this with you when we talked before. I think I would pick different destinations that I've always thought, oh God, yeah, I'd love to go there and shoot. But so you've hunted in Europe a lot, is that right?
Well, I've hunted it in Europe, not a lot, 2 countries, England and Spain, right? In okay. England, Spain, and then in Africa, in South Africa, all of them chasing game birds. I don't do any big game hunting, but I love to eat venison and wild boar, any big game, right? But I have hunted, yes.
Okay, and then how about Asia? Have you done any wing shooting in any of the Asian countries?
I had a call from a friend last year saying we ought to head to Mongolia. There is a subspecies of the checker partridge in the mountains of Mongolia. And I said, sign me up. And so he said, all right, let's talk about it. And so maybe that will come on board. But when we lived in Korea with my dad and my family, we found of this island in Korea where they were shooting pheasants, right? Where they were shooting pheasants. And somehow we never got to go. But there were hunters going to this island where there was pheasant hunting. And I think it was the Upland Almanac who a few years back had, in Japan, had the concept of the shiki hunter in Japan, which I found pretty interesting as well. But I have not hunted Asia, even though we have some clients in Asia. And I try to take my gun everywhere I go, just in case there might be a bird or two to chase, you know.
Well, and I can tell you I have a handful of followers on my Instagram page from Japan. And they seem fascinated by the pheasant hunting. So there's interest over there at the very least.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Charlie, one of the things that we talked about that we didn't go into a lot of detail with was when you and your dad decide that you're going to go on a shooting trip. I'm sure that there are certain steps that you take as you prepare yourself to go. And those are going to differ depending on where you're going somewhat, but many of them are going to be the same, are they not?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, because we're so passionate about the upland side of the sporting traditions and the waterfowl. In terms of gear, it's usually the same. But the one thing, and I think you can read it on Missing Sucks, there's a tip there. The one thing you can do is realize how uncomplicated, a lot less complicated than what it is thought, in terms of traveling with a gun internationally. We think about it as this big headache, and it's not, right? But the one thing you can do is educate yourself. Just go to the TSA website, educate yourself as to the processes, because if there's going to be any problems regarding gun transactions, it's because the agent, and I'm not complaining about the agents, because they're so busy and understaffed, they just don't know. So 50% of the time when I have carried guns in a very humble, non-arrogant way, I can see that they don't know what to do. And I'll say, oh, I have to switch this over to your side and open it this way. And they really do appreciate it, So knowing the regulations on how to travel, that helps a lot, especially if you're traveling alone without a tour operator. There are great tour operators out there that take care of the whole headache,
And what about like licensing? How would I go about finding out what licensing I might need to shoot ducks or upland game in Chile, for example?
So the guide or the contact there, right, would probably be your best resource, right? So when we've gone somewhere, okay, we're coming hunting, and it is almost inherent that they will say, okay, I need to get your license. When you get here, let me get the paperwork started. And usually before we arrive, so much of that paperwork is done. We just have to sign it when we get there, and you pay a little bit on that end. But the absolute joy of the internet, I know this might sound like I'm 100 years old, but the internet, especially, I remember before when I used to go to Kansas or go out west shooting, we'd always have to go to the Walmart to buy our licenses, right?
That's
now,
right.
Something so simple as just, gosh, before I go, I'm going to buy it online, which is fantastic.
No, you buy it on your phone as you're on your way,
Exactly. I mean, something as small as that, what a big difference that's made,
Absolutely. And then, and this may seem like an obvious question, but from somebody that's experienced, it matters. How do you find the guides? How do you decide, okay, this is where we're going to go, this is who we're going to shoot with?
I don't think at any point in time we've had so much information at our very own fingertips, and there's so many outfitters out there that are reputable, good people that actually alleviate the traveling headaches that you might have from doing that. So choosing your best operator, calling up the operator, asking about this, asking about that. I mean, there's hundreds of tour operators out there, right? I think that is actually the best source to actually get a little bit of information on. Okay, tell me about what we're going to do here in Paraguay. Tell me what we're going to do in the Limpopo region of South Africa, or I'd like to go shoot these sand grouse in Namibia or wherever it is. Right? I think talking to these people, the tour operators who are once again, in my opinion, artists because they're trying to make sure that these sporting traditions don't die, as well as trying to make a living, is usually going to be your best resource, you know?
Oh, that's good advice. So, Charlie, we haven't talked about your books. Why don't you tell people about your books?
Well, it's the books. There's two coffee table books I wrote. One is in the Echo of the Shot, and the other coffee table book is called In the Hunt for Words, which is just poetry. I wrote these books just to escape work, right?
I do a lot of that.
Yeah, much like you were probably working 10 days a week, right? And with my amount of international travel and just constant travel, as a matter of fact, my New Year's resolution this coming year is to be a diamond medallion on Delta Airlines. So I'm trying to stay home a little bit more. But these books I wrote, they're just simple, humble thoughts on so many issues that guide these sporting traditions for me personally, right? Both of them are dedicated to my dad. My dad doesn't know about the second one. He's going to get the first copy at Christmas in the Hunt for Words, which is poetry. But I think I write them just to actually decompress from work. And so what I'm going to start doing them, I had written them just on a boutique way. I didn't look for a publisher. I had them on Amazon, and they were selling in Amazon, but I just pulled it out. Because I think we're going to start offering them on missingsucks.com, which is the little company that I started once again to decompress from work about a month ago, right? And with that brand, with Missing Sucks, I was looking for a concept, a theme, if you will, or a feeling that could unite all upland and waterfowl and bird hunters together. And whether you're shooting driven grouse in Scotland, or you're shooting in overalls in Nebraska, you know, with a pump shotgun. I think those two very different human beings possibly could have a glass of wine or a beer and truly agree that missing truly sucks. You know?
Yes, it does.
It's that one thing that somehow unites us all at some point or another. So I think the two books will be offering them on Missing Sucks soon, maybe before Christmas. And once again, the website is missingsucks.com. And our mission at Missing Sucks is just to hopefully help you forget about that horrendous moment when we pulled the trigger and saw nothing fall, right? And so we're trying to help you forget about that moment and make you feel better with the content-rich environment that we're creating on the website. So you'll have poetry, you'll have cuisine, you'll have tips, wonderful experts in the industry who are just sending in their tips in a very kind way. You know,
oh, and it's location. Beautiful. The blog is beautiful, Charlie.
Just to be able to just unwind and take a look at the site, and hopefully we'll forget about missing, because I don't know how you feel about it, Ryan, but my God, does it suck to miss.
I put together a video for you. I don't know if you've seen, and well, it's on my personal YouTube page. So if you go to YouTube and just search my name, Ryan Reddick, there's a video on there of my most spectacular misses. And I'll apologize beforehand for the language, but there are some spectacular misses that I do not know how I pulled them off, but they were artful in their failure. And I made that video with you in mind, you and Missing Sucks in mind, I can tell you.
I love it. I love it. You know, there was this one gentleman, he knew about Missing Sucks, and we went shooting, and he was missing. Somehow he was just missing a lot of the clay targets, wasn't hitting them. And so I said, hey, I think you better go to Missing Sucks. And he was so ticked off that he said, you know what, Charlie, F Missing Sucks. I'm not going to your website. I hate this day. I want to forget about this day. I just want to go back to the car.
That's great.
He said, that sucks. I want nothing to do. I'm just pissed off right now.
Oh, Charlie, I really enjoyed talking to you. Our hour is up. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about that I know you love the 410, and we really haven't talked a whole lot about your passion for the 410.
The less we talk about that, the better.
Okay, you probably do catch some flack for that.
It's pure masochism, and I don't know why I do myself with my fellow 410 enthusiasts. I don't know why we do this to ourselves, but no, for nearly a decade now, it's just been shooting sporting clays and all the bird hunting, except for geese, we'll do with a 410. But there's a dichotomy there, right? Because you don't want to wound the bird, and nothing sadder for me than seeing wounded game. But at the same time, I enjoy the small bore so much. So practicing always helps. Trying to be committed so you won't wound a lot of birds. It's a wonderful bore, though, and I know a lot of sub-gauge enthusiasts out there would agree.
And I think my next new gun will probably be a 28 gauge. I've been I waffle between a 16 and a 28. I think I'm going to end up going with the sub-gauge.
Such an elegant bore, that 28 gauge. And I'm not no ballistic expert, but all those pellets arrive like a pancake, right? Apparently there's no shot string. And when all those pellets arrive, it's just a big hit. Just such a wonderful, wonderful bore, that 28 gauge, And
I've gotten, as I've gotten older, I shoot pretty much all my game birds with the 20 gauge. But I've gotten where, as I've gotten older, where I really don't like to shoot much past about 30, 35 yards. And I don't think a 28 gauge would handicap me really noticeably at that range. That's just my opinion. I'm giving it some thought. I'm sure not confident enough in my skills to feel like I need to be carrying a 410, though. I can tell you that.
So here's my 2 cents for what it's worth, right? I think 90% of our concern about shooting a 410 is psychological. And as you might agree, maybe 100% of shooting skills is psychological. But I promise you, if you pick up a 410 and do exactly what you were doing with your 20 gauge or your 28 gauge, the odds are that you will surprise yourself. My goodness. Yes, it's a challenging bore, and they say it's for the experts and all that stuff. I don't agree with that. I think because nothing changes, you just have to tighten up a little bit on your swings and things like that. And to just see a bird fold, or a wild quail in southeast Georgia just fold to a 410, it's just a wonderful feeling. But I think it's a lot less, shall we say, scary once you start shooting it than what we initially drive ourselves to think before we pick it up for the first time.
Well, I believe, and I'm no expert on shooting, as you can go and watch my video and see, that I believe that that really, probably 85-90% of shooting is psychological. You've got to have that faith to let go and let that muscle memory take over and do all the things that your body wants to do anyway to be successful. And to do that, you have to have confidence in what you're carrying, and confidence in the fact that you can make that shot. And if you've got that doubt, you're going to miss.
Yep. I have this wonderful friend, a Southern gentleman here, just a wonderful family man, great guy, great shot, 410 enthusiast. That when he misses, he'll just say everything was just gray matter. It was in your head. That it's just gray matter. It's just gray matter. And I think he's absolutely right.
Yeah, I always compare it to shooting a basketball. So when I was a boy, I played basketball when I was in high school, and if you think about making that shot, you're going to miss every time. If you just shoot, do what you've done 1,000 times before in that gym, that ball will go in the hole every time. And shooting a shotgun's a lot like that. Not exactly like it, but a lot like it.
Agreed.
Well, Charlie, again, is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you think we need to talk about before we call it an evening?
I just want to thank you. I think you're doing a great initiative to make sure that we get a lot of this viral marketing of the pods, and getting the message out there to the new generation. I applaud you for your efforts, and it was nothing but a pleasure to speak to you and have this wonderful exchange.
Well, and I hope that somebody sitting in an office, be it in Atlanta or Houston or Denver, that's been thinking about going down to South America and hunting birds, I hope they listen to this and they get a little bit from this. If nothing else, they get motivation to go and make it happen. Because life's just a collection of experiences, and if you turn your back on experiences, before you know it, your opportunities will be gone, and you won't have the opportunity to go down and do those things that you wanted to do.
God, you're not kidding. You're not kidding. Agreed.
Charlie, have a wonderful evening, sir.
Thank you so much, Ryan. We'll keep in touch, and all the best.
Yes, sir.
Oh, they're here. They've got to be here. That one, literally, I stepped on it. Did you and I shoot the same bird the first shot?